We are now one step closer to video being far less of a nightmare on Linux. To this day, whilst we have things like MKV and various other containers, MP4 remains the most popular video container format in the entire world, which has been a bit of a problem in the open source space. And this is just one part of a much larger spec known as mpeg 4, because core parts of the spec have remained patent encumbered. There have been patents attached to them, which make implementing and supporting it this complicated legal grey zone where nobody's probably gonna get sued. There's probably not gonna be any issues, but legally, it's a ticking time bomb. This has different implications from country to country. Some places don't acknowledge software patents, some do. Some have really strict limitations, others very minimal. And when we're dealing with something that is open source, that is something that is being distributed across the entire world, which makes this very complicated for people who are not lawyers. They just want to make software. Now, on your Linux system, you can probably play an MP4 file totally fine with no issue whatsoever. That's because whilst there is support in FFMPEG, and basically everything relies on FFmpeg, there are some things that do slightly other things, but most things are just an FFmpeg wrapper. The logic is that they are not distributing the support for this because FFmpeg, all they're doing, they're distributing the source code. So then it is on the distros because the distros, they're distributing the binaries. But the distros, well, they say, well, they're not actually the ones who are liable for the problems. It's actually the individual user. They're the ones that need to supply the license for these patents. And ultimately what ends up happening, nobody is actually dealing with the patents. Everybody is just kind of like passing the problem along and hoping that nothing happens here. Nobody calls them on it. And, yeah. It is a bizarre legal spider web that everyone just kind of accepts is there. Nobody wants to deal with. Nobody wants to really rock the boat. It's just, don't talk about it. Don't acknowledge it. Because in a couple of years, the problem, frankly, doesn't exist. You might think I'm joking here, but honestly, that is kind of the goal here. Just ignore the problem, ignore any of the issues, because ultimately the problem will just go away. The patents will expire, and it'll be fine. Now, the problem with MP4 is it's not just a single standard. There are currently, where are we at? 34 parts of the standard. Now, most of these parts, frankly, don't actually matter, but we have parts like Part 2 visual, Part 3 audio, so on and so forth. The important ones are Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 6, Part 10, and Part 14. These are the ones which are considered like core to supporting mpeg 4. Anything else you can kinda get away with not dealing with. When the patents for these parts of the standard expire, it can basically be treated as patent unencumbered format, and most of the legal problems go away. Yes, there are still legal problems with some of the other parts, but they are far, far less important to concern yourselves with. But here's what makes it even more complicated. Yes, there are all of these parts, but there's not just one patent for all of these parts, because there are different patents in different countries, and those different patents expire on different dates. However, we do have a little bit of good news here. Finally, the last mpeg 4 visual patent has expired. So that is Part 2 right here. That is not the last crucial thing we need, but we're getting very close to it. This was a problem thanks to the patent held in Brazil. Now, we'll get to why the Brazilian patent expired far later than any of the others, because it is relevant to another patent we'll talk about a little bit later. As for the European patent, this expired back in 2021, and the last of the meaningful patents in the US, this was back in 2022. There were further less important ones back in 2023, but everything for visual has now expired. Ultimately, what does this mean for you? Well, there's still a bit of waiting to be done. I just realized I have a mistake here. My bad. I'll fix that. Means there's still some waiting to be done, because what is included here is the original DivX and XVid codecs. XVid, not Xvideo. That's a different thing. So MP4 is just a container. The important part is what is inside the container. That is our video codec. And whilst this isn't nothing, and it does mean that when we're dealing with videos that were encoded about 25 years ago, there's no longer any patent issues dealing with that codec. No one's really using DivX or XVid anymore. DivX does still exist as this freemium codec. There is a whole company behind it. They're still supporting it. It's just not the standard that anyone is actually dealing with now. When we're talking about the audio component, the AAC, this was patent encumbered up until 2017. So the audio component is also dealt with. But there is still one major problem here. We're not using these old codecs anymore. We're not using DivX. We're not using XVid anymore. The problem is there is also a patent for one of the major codecs we do actually use, that being H.264. So you might recall from a couple of years ago, Fedora made a change which bothered quite a few people, myself being one of those people. Fedora Linux disabling Mesa's H.264, H.265, and VC1 VARPI support over legal concerns. What was done here is Mesa added the ability to, at build time, disable support for these codecs. This option had never existed in Mesa before this point, but because there were these legal patent concerns regarding H.264, they went and disabled this by default. Now, since that point, there have been solutions to this, RPM Fusion, all this good stuff, but it was a big drama at the time. However, from a legal standpoint, it makes sense why they did it. But this goes back to what I was saying, right? They'd been shipping support for it all this time. No one had called them on it. There was no actual problem that was like a current legal case going on. But because there was a possibility, a potential, maybe someone could call them on it, we got to get rid of the patent encumbered solution. Now, when it comes to H.264, this is why I said there's still a little bit of waiting left. We have this page right here. Have the patents for H.264 MPEG-4 AVC expired yet? Yes. Elsewhere? No, in Brazil, Malaysia, and the United States. This article only considers H.264 version 3 high profiles, which are the most commonly used profiles. There are other ones, they might take longer, but again, this is the core part that is really, really important. These profiles were standardized in 2005, so only patents with a priority before this date are reported here, unless otherwise noted. Although patents last only 20 years, there are additional delays in processing and publishing at the patent office after submission. And this is part of the reason why we've got some real funky stuff going on here. China expired in 2025, Japan also in 2025, Canada in 2024, and Europe in 2025. There are quite a few patents held in the MPEG LA patent list. This is the bane of our existence. Yes, there are separate US patents held by Nokia, but all of these do expire before this becomes a concern, so doesn't really matter as much. And you might have noticed I skipped over one because there is this Brazilian patent also in 2030. There was this one in the MPEG LA 2030. So late 2030 is when this stops being a problem. for the most part. I briefly touched on it earlier. Why does Brazil keep being a problem? Well, this is what we call in the industry a legal loophole, an exploit of the Brazilian legal system. This is about MP4 Part 2, but it applies to the H.264 stuff as well. The intellectual property behind MPEG 4 Part 2 was distributed across hundreds of patents held by more than a dozen organizations, with the largest blocks concentrated at 3 Japanese electronics companies: Mitsubishi Electric with 255 patents, Hitachi with 206, and Panasonic with 200. MPEG LA, the Denver-based administrator that pioneered the modern patent pool model, collected royalties from a pool that eventually reached more than 10,000 licensees operating across devices as varied as consumer DVD players, game consoles, surveillance cameras, and internet streaming services. In April 2023, Via Licensing Corporation acquired MPEG LA and reorganized as the Via Licensing Alliance, now administering a portfolio described as covering approximately 50,000 patents across more than 130 countries. MPEG 4 Part 2 visual was part of that issue. The pool had been winding down for years. Most US and EU patents lapsed through the early 2020s, with the last non-Brazilian patents clearing on January 28, 2024. But under Brazilian patent law, certain filings calculate their term as 10 years from the date of grant rather than 20 years from filing, a provision that extended the life of the Siemens held, this one right here, well past the rest of the world's timeline. So it was supposed to expire back in 2024, but thanks to this fun little Brazilian law thing, it granted an additional 6 years from that point. A provision that extended the life of the Siemens held, this patent right here, well past the rest of the world's timeline, pushing it out another 2 more years. But it wasn't just a Brazilian patent, because it was part of a patent pool. Patent pool mechanics, as documented in the pool's own structure and in criticism of the parallel MPEG 2 pool, mean that a single active patent in a pool can maintain full licensing obligations for licensees operating in or selling into the market covered by that patent. Brazil is the world's 7th largest economy. Any company with the MPEG 4 Part 2 licensing agreements that distributed products into Brazil remain technically obligated under those agreements until today. This patent was not just a footnote, it was the legal linchpin that kept the entire licensing structure operative in one of the world's largest consumer electronics markets. And pretty much the same thing is happening with H.264 as well. But after 2030 ends, after that point, finally, the problem is going to no longer exist. And finally, we're going to be in a world where MPEG 4 is no longer a legal nightmare to support. No more jumping through these weird hoops and trying to half enable things. The core parts of the spec will finally be open. And yes, there will still be problems, but the problems are problems that don't really matter. Yes, those are still patent encumbered, but they can be ignored. The core parts of the spec will finally be open. Hopefully going forward, we don't wind up in this situation once again. And I think that we probably won't. Not because companies don't want to do it. Companies know the value of having these patents, of having these codecs. But they also know the danger of their competitors having them. So I think just out of fear of anybody else trying to do it, we're going to see more of these open codecs like AV1, more open containers like MKV, and hopefully not be in this situation where one company has it and then everybody else just kind of has to deal with it, or one licensing organization has it and everyone just has to deal with it. Now, when it comes to AV1, there have been some legal challenges regarding its royalty-free status as a codec. So there is currently a lawsuit that was opened up by Dolby going after Snapchat. Dolby is claiming that some of their patents have been infringed upon, that AV1 isn't actually this royalty-free codec because it's actually something that is derived from patents they hold. We don't know how this one is going to iron out. This was only filed a couple of months ago. Usually lawsuits like this take quite a while to deal with, but we shall see. Hopefully, after 2030, we no longer have to think about this problem though. I forgot to record the outro, so let me know what your experience was like during this whole AUR malware situation. At this point, my understanding is everything has pretty much been cleaned up, so best practices still apply, but you're pretty much safe to do things now. You've been safe for like a couple of weeks at this point. So let me know your thoughts down below. Go like the video, go subscribe as well, go and hype the video if you're on mobile, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and goodbye now.
Something like this.